one of the things Bion used to say was, what do you say to a patient? And my topic today is about being in the line of fire. What happens between a therapist and a patient? What kind of situations come up? How do you handle those situations at the moment? I'll tell you a little bit about myself, so you'll have some frame of reference for how I think about things and how I approach it. But I first started off being schooled at USC with a humanistic existential philosophical frame of reference. And I was very good at a very small portion of reality. And if you happened to come to me and fit into that particular thing I did well, you were lucky. But if on the other hand your particular experience or frame of mind or mental set or problem didn't fit in my area of my particular tunnel vision, there were some problems with it. So then I had Gestalt training after that, and when I put the two together, as one of my distinguished colleagues once said, I practiced something that was something like bullshit Gestalt therapy. But then I trained with Bob and Mary Goulding in the area of TA, and Albert Ellis in rational emotive work, and Simpkin in the pollsters and Gestalt work. And basically at that point in my career I had a very good eye for externally what was happening in the moment, but not much cooking at the unconscious level. So it was about this point I read a book called Uncommon Therapy, the Psychiatric Techniques of Milton H. Erickson, MD. And Erickson was, there was something about that book that I was hoping he was still living, and I should call him up. And maybe that's where I'll tell you this part of the story as Erickson would work, in the kind of pace in which he spoke. Now, when Erickson began the work, you were immersed in an experience from the very second he came into the room. And Erickson said that people's conscious minds had all sorts of habitual ways of behaving, but that their unconscious minds had all the thoughts, memories, feelings, and actions that they needed to live a happy and a healthy life. Now, when I called Erickson up, and I said I wanted to see him individually on September 11th, 1977, and he was a stickler for details. He says, well, I have a small group coming that day, but come, you'll get what you want. And I thought, how the hell does he know what I want? He doesn't even know me. But he is Milton Erickson, this world-famous hypnotist, and this book on common therapy's got all these magical cures in them. So I said, okay. And he hung up the phone. And then I realized that I was going somewhere, and I didn't know what time it started or where it was or how to get there. And I called back and I explained this tremendous problem to Dr. Erickson. He said, call Mrs. Erickson from the airport. Click. Well, I guess he gave me all the information I needed. But I was more frustrated than the first time. So I had also heard a colleague went to Phoenix, and Erickson had very bad health. And there were certain days he didn't work. And I didn't want to go all the way to Phoenix for nothing. So I called him back again. And I said, Dr. Erickson, I hear that your health isn't that good and you don't work every day. Call the day before. I had never quite been dealt with this way. Now, my wife said she was just coming to find out what time to pick me up. But we got to Phoenix, and Erickson lived in a small ranch-style house, very humble house, rectangular office, old furniture, and there was just something about it that she never left. Now, Erickson came in, his wife wheeled him in, and he had a purple silk shirt, purple pants, silk pants, purple knitted booties, and he had gout. His feet were like cement blocks. He had polio. He had crippling arthritis. His tongue was dislocated, and his lips were paralyzed. I took one look at Erickson, and I thought, wow, no matter how tough my job is, it couldn't be this tough. And Erickson was like an old Viking. I remember he had his first bout of polio when he was 17. And he overheard the doctors tell his mother that he would never see the next sunrise. And for months he was laying in the bed and all he could move were his eyes, which is why he became so good with detail. And when the doctor left, he called his mother and father and he said that he was damn angry at that stupid old doctor for worrying his mother like that. And would they please move his bed facing the window where the sun came up? He would be damned if he didn't see another sunrise. That was the sort of spirit Milton Erickson had. So he passed out a sheet of paper and he says, write your name, age, date, marital status, number of children, occupation, and highest degree. Everyone did that. He looked around and he looked at me and he said, you forgot the date and your marital status. Of course, my wife was right there. That was sort of embarrassing. And so I wrote that down. And Erickson, by the way, he did not say hello when he came in the room. It was not. That was the first thing he said. Then he looked at me and he said, so you come all the way from California and you're avoiding the hot seat. Now I had written down Gestalt therapy, and Erickson made it a point to speak to people in their own language. I never heard him use it before, and I never heard him use it after. Now, I was the type of person who was quick-witted, pretty good scalp hunter, and hanging therapists out to dry. And Erickson somehow sensed this in the first couple of seconds, and I was thinking about outwitting him, and he came right back and he said, now that I mention it, I see that you're still avoiding it. At this point I got up, I moved over to the chair next to his wheelchair. And he says, so you're a clinical psychologist, huh? I'll bet you don't even know why I'm wearing purple. Of course I had an answer for everything. So I said, well, I guess it's just part of Dr. Erickson's style. And he said, huh, I'm colorblind. It's the only color I can see. Well, I got the message. He was the teacher, I was the student, and I was back in the 3rd grade. Now, no one I had ever worked with had ever been able to do anything like that in 3 minutes. The way he set those minimum conditions created the environment in which the change was possible. So then he said, what is it you came for? And I says, well, I thought I came to learn hypnosis and to experience it. But I've heard about your unusual talents, and I wonder if you could help me stop moving. Now, as time would have it, later on, I found out I was a type A personality. Very driven. I couldn't even stay by the pool for an hour without feeling driven. And Erickson went on to tell stories at a pace like this, hour after hour after hour. And I wondered, when is that old man ever going to shut up? I don't get the point of his stupid stories anyway. Every once in a while, there would be like a flash would go by. Sometimes he'd tell the same story 3 times. I was angry at him. But finally, I just gave up trying to figure out what he was doing. And there was a feeling of relaxation that set in. And one of the stories he told 3 times was about a patient of his named Pete. Now, Pete was an ex-convict. He lived most of his life in jail, but he'd been out of jail for the last 7 months. He was living with a girl. He had a job as a bartender, and he was drunk every night for the last 7 months. Of course, Erickson wasn't specific about what he meant by the word drunk. Well, his girlfriend got sick and tired of him, and she threw him out. Well, Pete, feeling very desperate, walked 18 miles in the blazing hot sun of Phoenix, Arizona. Got to Dr. Erickson's office, knocked on the door, and asked him for his help. Dr. Erickson gave it to him. Pete became infuriated, slammed the door, walked another 18 miles back to town, talked his girlfriend into taking him back in, resumed his job as a bartender, was drunk every night for another 2 weeks. His girlfriend got sick and tired of him again. She threw him out. Pete, feeling more desperate than he had the first time, walked another 18 miles. Blazing hot desert sun, aching body, parched throat, cotton mouth, blistered feet, dispirited. Got to Dr. Erickson's office, knocked on the door, and asked him for his help. Dr. Erickson said, "Pete, you asked me for my help, and I gave it to you, and you told me to shove it. So I shoved it. And if you want my help now, you're going to have to beg me to take your boots." Dr. Erickson went on to explain what he meant by that. That was the convict's code of honor, that he really meant business. And without that sort of commitment, couldn't really expect very much to happen at all. Pete, understanding the full nature of the request, became even more furious than he was the first time. Got up, slammed the door, walked another 18 miles in the blazing hot sun of Phoenix, Arizona. Talked his girlfriend into taking him back in. Resumed his job as a bartender. He was drunk every night for another week and a half. His girlfriend threw him out. She said that was for the last time. Pete, feeling the most desperate he's felt yet, walked another 18 miles. Blazing hot sun of Phoenix, Arizona. Got to Dr. Erickson's office. Took off his boots. Knocked on the door. Begged Dr. Erickson for his help. Dr. Erickson said, "Pete, come on in. All I want you to do is go out into my backyard. You can stay as long as you need. There's an old mattress out there you can sleep on. If you get cold at night, Mrs. Erickson will give you a blanket. I don't think you will because it's summertime. If you get hungry, Mrs. Erickson will give you some pork and beans. And think about what you want to do with the rest of your life." Pete was out there for a time. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was Dr. Erickson's birthday, and his daughter and his granddaughter came to visit. They asked if they could go out and talk with Pete. spent the better part of 2 days out there. It was a short time later, Pete told Dr. Erickson that he never knew that girls and women like that really existed. He asked for his boots back. About a year later, he heard from Pete. Pete had a job that he enjoyed very much. He was living in a relationship that he found quite meaningful, and that he was dry. Now, when I worked with Erickson, he was mostly training people, but I had the good fortune to see him work with a patient who called up in crisis. And she had an acute asthma attack and couldn't sleep all night. Her name was Barbara. Erickson told her to come right over. When she did, he asked her if she wanted to be hypnotized. She said that she did. After about 20 minutes, Erickson would cut his space out when he worked. He knew how to deal with the space between people. And the creation of the kind of environment where therapeutic change could happen quite rapidly. At the end of this 20 minutes, Barbara's face looked quite mellow. Color came back in her face and her eyes looked sparkly. But then her conscious mind said, "But Dr. Erickson, how is that going to help me stop coughing and sleep tonight?" And Erickson looked at her and he said, "Take it from an authoritarian old man like me that you have very kissable lips." Well, it was as if he had just reached in and touched Barbara's heart. She just beamed. And she got up to leave. She turned around and her conscious mind took over, her conscious set took over, and she said, "But Dr. Erickson, how's that going to help me stop coughing and sleep tonight?" And Erickson kind of turned over his shoulder with his wheelchair, and he said, began to sing with his dislocated tongue and paralyzed lips. "The lip bone is connected to the cheekbone. The cheekbone is connected to the neck bone. And the neck bone is connected to the chest bone." And he turned around to the group and he said that he knew that Barbara would sleep very, very well that night, in a way that her conscious mind couldn't negate. But one other story comes to mind about Erickson. And no, I don't think I'll tell that one. I'll tell one. I had a patient referred to me from another very well-known hypnotist who had failed with this particular patient. And she said to me when she came in that she didn't want to talk to me at all. That talking to therapists didn't really go anywhere. And I was the hypnotizer, and the entire treatment would be without her talking to me. And so I began to tell stories as my unconscious mind tuned into her unconscious mind, my own use of sensory perception, and what kind of an environment was existing. moment to moment, which I would gear the stories to. If I felt pain in the heart, I would tell heart stories. What was the patient projecting onto me? And how could I utilize that as one might, as Bion might later speak about the container, working through the transference. So, tuning into what was being projected onto me, if I felt pain in the head, I would tell stories to relieve self-torture. If I felt nausea in the stomach, I would tell stories about people who lied to themselves. And at the end of the session, she says to me, when there's no time to work anything through, her last comment was, well, you know, I've had 13 therapists before Dr. So-and-so failed, and he gave me 3 names. Yours was one of them. I'm going to make 2 other appointments and see if I can kill 3 birds with 1 stone and then make up my mind. I broke out in hysterical laughter, which she didn't quite understand. And she says, what are you laughing at? I says, I got a bulletproof vest. You can't kill me. And she left. 2 weeks later, she came back into the practice, and things have been going fine ever since. I was telling stories with a top-level executive, and he had 7 years of analysis before he came to me. And the particular problem he had was in these high-power executive meetings, he would feel so much stress that he would stop breathing. And he would hold his breath, and when he tried to make a point, he would do something with his voice where he would lose his voice 4 times a year totally, and at the end of each day his throat hurt. And so I don't know where the hell these stories were coming from, but I started telling him stories about Uncle Remus and Brer Rabbit, and in the middle of the session he says, what the hell are you talking about? What are you telling these stories about Brer Rabbit for? And I forget what I said from there, but it just sort of went on and integrated. So he comes back the following week, and he says, we had this big corporate meeting after I left here, and there were 7 people in the boardroom, and he said, you know how pissed I was last week and how frustrated I was. He says, well, 4 times during the meeting, he says, I just pounded my fist on the desk and I said, Brer Rabbit! And everybody was shocked. I mean, they were looking like, what the hell's with, you know? And he says, I had the greatest time. He says, it was great. I just enjoyed myself so much. So there's part of what this man was asking me for. He's saying, look, with 7 years of analysis, I'm still crazy, but I'm worried about being crazy, and I don't know how to use it. So can you help me find a way to use my own craziness in a way that I enjoy and I have fun with, and I can work with? Don't cure me, just help me enjoy myself. And there was, by telling crazy stories, I was using my own craziness. Now, a second major influence in my life was Carl Whitaker. After I wrote the book, Whitaker wrote the foreword, and Milton Erickson had died at this time, and Whitaker was the guest speaker at the Erickson conference in Phoenix. And so I met him for 20 minutes or so, and he was like a shining star. Everybody was trying to grab onto him, and I was talking a little bit, and people grabbing him. And so anyways, I met this big ball at night. I was by myself, sort of walking around, and this guy comes up to me, and he says, "Hey, you look like you're doing nothing. Why don't you come over and talk to my girlfriend?" He's from Australia. He says, "She'll tell you all about Australia." I've never been there. It sounded like a better way to spend time than what I was doing. So I did, and I was fascinated the first hour. And the second hour, she gets into talking about her problems with this guy who was like in and out, in and out. Comes in to see what's happening with her, and he's out again. So I says, "Well, look, Whitaker just wrote the foreword to my book. I bet I could talk him into doing a co-therapy session. I'd love to see what he does. If you and John want a therapy session." She says, "I'll ask him." John says, "All right." I asked Whitaker. He says, "You're a little pushy, but I'll do it." So we have that session, and I learned a lot from it. It was an entirely different way to work at the unconscious level in terms of absurdity. And he said he liked supervising me because I was real good at pointing out where his power was, and in ways that he didn't know about. So I says, "Geez, I'd really like you to teach me family therapy, but you're in Wisconsin, and I'm in California." He says, "Well, you got a speakerphone?" I says, "No." "What, you supervise over the phone?" "Yeah." "You do therapy over the phone?" "Yeah." I says, "Well, there's another problem. I was in practicing in San Diego, and I did mostly couples and family work, but I don't know if there's any families in Los Angeles. I never got a referral that way up here." He says, "Well, maybe God will be good to you." So in a couple of months, I get 2 families come in. Just timely. And I call him up, and I set up the supervision hour on the phone. And he says, "Well, no family therapist is trustworthy enough by themselves to do family therapy. He says, you need a co-therapist." "Oh, Carl, Jesus, in LA, double fees. I got to drive to somebody's office. They got to drive to my office. It's a pain in the ass. I don't want to do it." "Get your wife." "She's not a therapist." "That's all right. She'll know what your bullshit is." "Well, I'll ask her." She says, "Well, I don't know anything about doing therapy, but, and she says, if you want me to sit in, I'll sit in." And so then the next session, our first baby was just born, and she's up all night with the baby, so the session's at 7 a.m., and I'm in the session, and Whitaker says, "How can I take you seriously? You want to learn family therapy?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you're a co-therapist, and your co-therapist isn't here." "Well, she was up all night with the baby." "Well, did you ask her?" "No." "Well, all right, I'll go in and ask her." I ask her. She said, "Get the hell out of here. I've been up all night with the baby." So I come back and I tell Whitaker that, and he says, "Well, welcome to the world." And then my parents were out here, and he says, "Your parents are out here and you didn't ask them up into the session?" "Well, I mentioned it to them." "Well, what they say?" "They said they were ambivalent." "Would you tell them it was important to you?" "No." How come?" "Well, I guess I was ambivalent." "How can I take you seriously? Do you want to learn family therapy?" So he put this sort of challenge out, and I tell my parents, made a session Monday, "You're coming to family therapy." And they say, "You're the nut in the family. You need the therapy. You go." "We're too old. It's too emotionally upsetting. It'll kill us, and you'll be responsible." So I'm saying, you're coming, we're not coming. Meantime, we go over to my wife's parents' house, and I tell them I want them to come. My mother-in-law is very wishy-washy. My father-in-law says, not unless my wife's brother and his girlfriend come, who we hadn't talked to for a year and a half. So I says, listen, if you don't come, I'll never do you another favor as long as I live. I figured I learned something from Erickson there. And my wife calls her brother. They're more upset about the rift than I think. So they come. My parents see what a pain in the ass her parents are being, and they decide they can become better parents by showing up for this meeting. So the squeeze is on her parents to come. And so there's 8 of us and the baby in the room on a speakerphone with this voice from Wisconsin. So it goes the first hour, and Whitaker, he only works an hour, that's it. And he says, it sounds like you guys are just warming up. Why don't you keep it going and see what happens? It goes another hour and 15 minutes, and they say to me, hey, can you get that guy back? And I say, yeah, I think so. I said, but my parents are going back to Connecticut. And my brother-in-law says, well, that's okay, we can hook him up in a conference call. So then we're in Connecticut to Wisconsin to Los Angeles. And it got into the 3rd meeting, and my father-in-law says, Carl, thank you, but no thank you. This is too emotionally upsetting. I quit. And Whitaker says, well, you don't have to come to family therapy, but I don't have to see the family. He doesn't say he won't. So he's got some leverage there. He can change the tactic if he has to, but he puts it out in a way that, I don't know if he would have or if he wouldn't. It didn't get that far. But he puts it out in a way where if anybody in the family feels enough concern about the family, they can pick the ball up and run with it. So I get a call Thursday night before Monday from my mother-in-law, and she says, Dad's just too emotionally upset to come. He says he will return to family therapy when everyone is well. He had a high IQ, this man. So, anyways, this could stall the whole process, and I'm handcuffed. And so I was frustrated as hell for about 10 minutes. And then I said, now, what will Dr. Erickson do in this spot? So I called her back and I said, I want you to tell Dad that I want no further contact with any member of the family until he returns to family therapy. And she says, what do you mean? You want no further contact with any member of the family until he returns? This is simply what I said. I want no further contact with any member of the family until he returns to family therapy. So he didn't know what the hell I meant by that. If I wanted a divorce, or if I just didn't want to see any of them, or so I get it. And I says, furthermore, I got to call Whitaker by 7:30 tomorrow morning, or he's going to charge me for the session Monday. So you got till then to let me know. I get a call at 7:29, and she says, Dad is too emotionally upset to come this week, but he will return on a continuing basis after that. In Erickson, I learned from him, when you have that kind of a victory, you never rub it in. Enough's enough. I said, fine. So then we go, from that point, 26 weeks, coast to coast, family therapy. And Whitaker wound up supervising my wife and I another 52 weeks by phone. But in that 26 weeks, there were some important things that happened that I think happens in every person's life and every therapist's life. There's some sort of response you just can't stand it. It drives you up the walls. And one of the family members makes that kind of response in the family session. And it had the feeling of sort of kicking one in the genitals, twisting their stomach and choking them to death all at the same time. And I said, thinking Carl was the expert on this one, I says, hey Carl, how are you going to handle that one? And he says, I'm going to enjoy it. What else can I do with it? Now, I wouldn't have thought of that in I don't know how many years. See, but what this person was asking for was enjoyment when they did everything to not be enjoyed. So if I could enjoy it and learn how to play with it, no matter what the circumstance, I could get through most anything. And of course, it's much easier doing it in therapy than in your own primitive family situation. So if you can do it there, you can bring it into most any situation. And then my parents are were threatening to move out here since 1968, and they would say, but it's, we got all our friends and all our relatives, and they would go on and on. And Whitaker handled that one by saying something like, he says, well, I wouldn't move out there for you. That son of a bitch and son of yours, and you know what a maniac he is, and your in-laws outnumber you, and you can't count on them for shit. You'll be giving up all your old friends, and you got your job at the hospital back there, and to my father, all your music stuff. He said, and he went on, building these catastrophic expectations for the yes but players into huge proportions. And at the end, he says, but take a chance. And you almost couldn't hear that, take a chance. Which many people say Whitaker's work is hypnotic in that way. Well, I get a call 4 days later saying, Len, we're moving to California. From 1968. And basically what we had was a family spirit after that. It was like we all liked each other as friends. All those barbed wire fences or tolerating each other or kind of you go there to put up with them because it's a holiday or, it was all gone. It was like we were just friends, the whole group of us. So that was sort of then I had the meat and potatoes of who I am and, what kind of pasta I sell, Bergantino and whatever. I had my life working okay. And then there's the matter of, I guess Bion. When we talk about Bion in terms of extraordinary competence.
Extraordinary what?
Competence. Yeah, competence. Now, to this point, well,